Hey, work from homers, Adam Schrader here. We love bringing you this podcast, and thousands of you have proven that it's been helpful for you. But since time and online storage space aren't free, Naresh and I wanted to come to you personally to ask for your financial support through Patreon. Go to patreon.com/workfromhomeshow and help support the show. And we appreciate your support at any amount you choose. That's patreon.com/workfromhomeshow. Thanks for your support. Let's get to the show.
Forced to work from home by your employer? Laid off or feeling depressed at home? Do you want to make money working from anywhere? We'll show you how to do it from your couch. It's time for another episode of the Work From Home Show. Coming to you from their homes in Austin, Texas and Tampa, Florida, here are your hosts, Adam and Naresh.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Work From Home Show. I'm Naresh Vissa. Adam is not available today. He had another obligation, so it'll be just me solo with Bromleigh McCleneghan. She is a minister at the United Church of Gainesville. She's also the best-selling author, co-author of Good Christian Sex, Why Chastity Isn't the Only Option, and Other Things the Bible Says About Sex, as well as the book When Kids Ask Hard Questions, Faith-Filled Responses for Tough Topics. Also the book Hopes and Fears, Everyday Theology for New Parents and Other Tired, Anxious People. I think that book is relevant to many people who are anxious or tired from the pandemic, or in my case, who had a child right before the pandemic. And also her new book, When Kids Ask Hard Questions, Volume 2, More Faith-Filled Responses to Tough Topics. Bromleigh McCleneghan, thank you so much for joining us on the Work From Home Show.
It is a pleasure to be with you today.
Let's first start a little bit with work from home parents. I'm sure you've had to work from home more since, let's say, March 2020.
Yeah.
And it seems like you are parents. So tell us about your personal background as well, because you've written a lot about kids and parents. So let's just start with, tell us about your background. How many children do you have? How long have you been married? And then also tying this all into the work from home atmosphere that we've seen since March 2020.
I have 3 kids, and they are 3 girls. One is a freshman in high school, one is a 6th grader, first year of middle school, and one is a 1st grader. My husband and I have been together since 2003, I think, and married since 2005. And then Fiona, our oldest, was born in 2007. So we've been doing this thing, this parenting thing together for a while now. He is a middle school teacher and also writes middle grade fiction. And one of the things that I sort of liked about him early on was that he, worked with kids and was great with kids. And I was like, oh, this dude could be a good dad. So that was attractive to me. We did spend much of the pandemic at home with our children. We started the pandemic in Illinois, where I was serving a church and he was teaching in a school district where he'd been for 13 or 14 years, and then moved to Gainesville, Florida for this new church gig. And so we've gotten to experience different ways that different states have engaged the pandemic. And that has been an interesting learning experience.
Well, that's going to be my next question, so I'll let you finish this up. But I would love to hear the differences between the 2 states, but we'll save that for the next question.
Yeah. Okay. Well then. So anyway, yeah. I mean, it's been impressive to me. I've always worked full time since finishing grad school, and minus some maternity leaves. But one of the things that was always important to me to be able to do my job sort of fully, and to be able not only to do my job, but also to do some writing as another ministry with a different audience, was having sufficient childcare, both paid and, with grandparents helping out. And then once the kids started school. And so the challenge of the pandemic was not just living with all the fear and the anxiety and all the other things, but how my spouse could teach all his classes from our dining room table, and then how we could help our kids engage with school, and then how I could do my work from our table, and it was, it was a fairly impossible endeavor. So I am deeply empathetic with, all of us trying to do this thing right now.
Yeah, and tell us, you said you moved from Illinois to Florida, and there were a lot of differences that you noticed between the two states as it came to working from home, as it came to just restrictions that maybe your children were having in school. Maybe in Illinois, your children probably couldn't even go to school. So tell us about those differences.
We shut down pretty completely in March of 2020. The kids, they got sent home. I think it was the week before they were supposed to have spring break. And then, of course, they just didn't ever go back. But Cook County, where we were living, that's suburban Chicago, was, all in on the attempt to flatten the curve and all that, staying home. We had shelter in place orders. And so I'm in Gainesville, which is where the University of Florida is, and Alachua County is a more progressive county. Our school board, for example, ran afoul of our governor this fall by instituting a mask mandate when the kids went back to school in person. And the governor was quite mad and said he would withhold funds and all sorts of delightful things. So when we were in Illinois, we really sort of trusted that the school district, for the most part, was going to do what they needed to do to keep our kids safe. And we have not had that conviction because of the wider state government and policy here in Florida. And we feel very lucky, I think, to be in our county and with our school board, but it's been really, really different. And my daughter, my oldest, she spent last summer, she went back to Illinois and stayed with she's 14, so she could get vaccinated. So she drove up with my mom to Illinois, and she saw some of her old friends, and, they were able to go out together sometimes because it was before Delta hit, and they had been vaccinated, and their vaccination rates in the community were in the 80%. And, it was more safe there. And we have never gotten that high a vaccination rate here, even in Alachua. And, it's really been a hotbed for the pandemic down here. So we've actually had a lot of guilt about moving our kids to what feels like a more dangerous place in the midst of this.
Did your husband, you said he's a middle school teacher, is he still teaching middle school in Gainesville?
Yes, he started, he actually was able to teach remotely in Illinois for most of last year, and then went back when they went back in person in the spring after the teachers could be vaccinated. But he did start the school year here at middle school here. And for the first couple of weeks, there were, dozens of kids quarantining at any given time. He didn't have full classes. It seems to be settling down now. But he's double masking and he's double vaccinated and waiting until he can go get his booster. And, we're hoping for the best.
Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about children and dialogue with children, because I think you have children from teenagers to, let's just say there's an age range amongst
down to early elementary.
Yeah, among your three children. And in your book, you talk a lot about communication with children, not just 4-year-olds, 5-year-olds, when little kids are asking hard questions. But I think as they get older and they start contemplating certain things like religion or science, they're going to ask harder questions. So the easy questions are hard to answer, but the hard questions are even harder to answer. because then we're putting in some ideologies and some worldviews and personal opinions in them. So for the parents who are spending a lot of time with their children, whether it's homeschooling or because they're working from home now and they weren't necessarily doing that 3 or 4 years ago, how can work from home parents create safe spaces of open dialogue with their children?
I think it's important for your kids to know, and often because you've told them explicitly, but that you love them and that you are not sort of afraid of their questions, that any question is okay to ask. And I think modeling curiosity about things, one of the things that there's a church program called Godly Play, which teaches Bible stories in a very particular way. But one of the things that that pedagogy involves is asking I wonder questions. I wonder what the people were feeling. I wonder what, and that sort of framework to kind of have that curiosity as an undercurrent in your interactions with your kids, and as they see you engaging the world, I think is a really important thing, because as they have questions, there's lots of things we feel, or lots of ways that we respond to things that we don't understand or that are unfamiliar or that are confusing. And so modeling the stance of curiosity and not being afraid to sort of explore complex or confusing or new areas or topics, I think is a really important first step in creating that safe space.
Yeah, I think one of the important things you said is being open as a parent to being asked questions. And I unfortunately had a parent, I mean, this is not a knock on them, great parent, but I had a parent who would constantly say, stop asking questions, just do, don't ask. And I think that was a cop-out answer to most of the questions. And I would say most of the parents or most of the mothers, my friends, gave similar answers. Hey, stop asking questions, just do it. And as I've grown up, and now that I'm a father myself, and I've gone through counseling, I've gone through therapy, I've realized that's the worst thing you can tell your child. It's just don't ask questions. And especially when it comes to God, I mean, you're a pastor, a believer in God, you're going to start getting a lot of questions. You meaning a parent will start getting, whether they're an atheist or a pastor or whatever, about God. And I think if a parent is religious, which I grew up in a very religious household, but the answer was always, don't ask questions, just submit to God. And that actually led me to go the other way and say, hey, God doesn't exist, or I just don't care about God anymore. And then once I started to independently seek these answers for myself, then I went back the other way and have been religious and deeply spiritual ever since, probably since my early 20s. So I just wanted to bring that up because you said as a parent, you want to keep that open communication of, hey, you want to tell your children, hey, you can ask me anything and I will try my best to answer it. And if I can't answer it, give me some time and I'll try to get an answer. Or in my case, I'll try to find someone who might be a better source to answer such a question.
Yeah, I think that's really, your experience is widely shared with a lot of folks who grew up in religious communities, or in some religious communities. I will say, there are plenty of religious communities that do things very differently. I mean, at the core of the Jewish Passover ritual, for example, is children asking questions. Why do we do this on this night? So certainly not all religious traditions are uniformly shutting down of curiosity. But I do think that is one of the things that makes this, Karen's and my volume a unique and useful contribution, is the sense that, it acknowledges that there are not easy or, universally applicable responses to every question, that context always matters, and the age of your child, the experience of your child, all of these things sort of matter. But at the same time, a lot of us have deeply held convictions about what we hope for in the world and what we want to give our children. And so having some modeling, and each of these essays has a narrative portion and then a list of sort of bullet pointed ideas for how to craft the conversation around this topic with your kid, and then a list of further resources like books or movies or other things. And and that's really, there have not been enough of those kinds of resources, I think, for parents. And so we've often been left sort of just kind of doing it on our own, or saying, well, I don't know, or what do you think? Which I will say, a lot of folks, because they felt indoctrinated, or because they felt like they were asked to accept things without understanding them, or their curiosity wasn't acknowledged, a lot of folks kind of go as you say, in the opposite direction and say, well, I'm just going to let my kid choose. And I will say, I think that's a really anxiety producing scenario for kids, because to think abstractly, to construct a worldview, that's hard work. and so offering them the tools, offering them some narratives that are meaningful to you, I think is really important. I do think, and I'm delighted to hear that you did some therapy to unpack some of your stuff, because I think that's such an important thing for parents to unpack the things that we're carrying with us, our presuppositions, and even our thoughts about what faith or meaning or values have to be, because often we need to reframe the things in our childhood, and so that we can do better by our kids, So one of the phrases that we use a lot at our house is, the story we tell is, the story we tell is that, Jesus is a part of God, and that Jesus died and rose again. And that shows us that God's love is the most powerful thing in all the world. That's the story we tell. The story we tell is that Jesus, the special baby, was born at Christmas. The story we tell is, God made the world. But we also tell a story that the world started in mysterious Big Bang sort of ways. Many of us participate in lots of different communities and tell lots of different stories. And kids, I think, can hold that much more easily than they can hold a bunch of abstractions. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, I absolutely know what you mean. And in defense of parents, at least when we were growing up, there was no Google, right? And
Right.
If you didn't own an encyclopedia, I can understand why a parent would be like, stop asking questions,
Yeah.
Whereas now most answers are at your fingertips. And I gave a very hard example of religion and God. But even if it's something as simple as, I grew up in a strict, and same with many people in my culture, in a strict kind of Eastern culture of no dating. It was just men in our house. Outside of my mother, it was all boys. And so it was stay away from girls, and as you get older, it's hard to tell a 15-year-old boy, hey, stay away from girls. That's a very difficult thing to do. And when there's no answer, I mean, there could be a simple answer on, why, this is why I want you to stay away. This is, what the goal is for the next few years. And this is how just keeping that open line of communication is important instead of, this is the rule, you must follow it.
Right. Yeah, I do think that it is, a lot of psychology talks about the difference between authoritarian parenting and authoritative parenting. And I think it's right there, right? It's not saying anything it's not, no one recommends being a particularly permissive parent, particularly when kids are really young, right? I mean, to say anything goes, to say it doesn't matter, that's highly not recommended. But authoritarian parenting, which is don't question me or don't question why, is not great either. But authoritative parenting, claims your authority to say this is how we want it to go in our family, and this is, and also explains why. I have authority because I am older and I am responsible for you, and I have slightly more experience in keeping you safe. But that's so you don't have to worry about it. You can just do the work of being a kid, but also, invites response and conversation. And I think that that's a really great dynamic to kind of shoot for. And I do think too, I mean, that it's worth doing the good hard work of thinking about the content of our values. And I think that's one of the things that, again, is delightful about this moment. As you say, they didn't have Google back then. And, but I also think that we are in a moment when we're listening to the wisdom of other communities more, when we're asking about what we heard and wondering, is that exactly right? Or is that not quite how I want to do it? There's a lot of folks in Christian communities right now who grew up in really conservative Christian communities with with purity culture and abstinence before marriage. Don't do anything. Even when you're dancing, always leave room for the Holy Spirit. And a lot of that became very shame-based for, folks as they reached young adulthood, and it really messed with their ability to kind of, have intimate relationships as they became adults and even as they married. And so wanting to examine then the norms, what are the values that shape that, and what are the things that we, again, are really important there, Anyway, I think it's an incredibly daunting time to be a parent, right? I mean, and I think one of the hardest things from working from home and being at home altogether during the pandemic is that it's really hard to get the headspace to do any kind of reflecting as a parent or as a partner when you're not often able to be physically alone. Somebody was talking about, on the internet somewhere, I was reading about, the phenomenon of staying up too late on your phone because it's basically the only alone time you have at all. And then you're more tired the next day. But but even if you're extroverted, deeply into attachment parenting, love your kids to death, we all need some headspace to do that reflecting. So anyway, so it is a really challenging time, but I also think that there are some really positive things about this moment.
Yeah, and this requires work. Being a parent is work, so you can be lazy. Yeah, you can be lazy like many parents and say, "Oh, just shut up and listen to everything I say," or just not even talk to your children at all and say, oh, the school is going to take care of you.
Mhm.
But the reason why we brought you on the show is because, like you said, this is a challenging time. We want to help parents. And a lot of these principles, they're absolutely applicable. If you're a manager, if you're working in a corporate environment, you don't want to treat your employees like this, like children, or like how bad parents treat their children. You don't want to have an authoritarian style, because they're going to come up and revolt against you. They're going to
Mhm.
rally and revolt against you. So this is absolutely applicable to business, the workforce, and we can see it in the workforce right now, where I read that they're expecting over 12 million jobs to become available by the end of the year, and those jobs are going to go unfilled, or they're basically going to be 12 million job openings.
Wow.
And so that's the labor shortage that we're already, we are facing quite a bit of a labor shortage, but it's going to get even worse. And I think one major reason for that is, once again, just authoritative or authoritarian cultures of, you must show up to the office, you must, come at this time, you must be working under my nose.
Mhm.
Whereas something more, a perk, I mean, this is now a perk now, where it's, hey, you know what? Just get your work done. You can come in whenever you want, or you can just work from home. Just get your stuff done, which is what we do at my company, Christian Media Marketing. It's very laid back, and people like the autonomy. They don't want, I think once you reach a certain age, people, they just want to get their paycheck and take care of their families. They don't want all these unnecessary meetings and ice cream socials and all these. They just want to get their work done and live their lives. And work takes up too much time in people's lives, but they don't want work to take up so much time in their lives. That's what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, no, and I think that's a really wonderful thing, right? I love my work, right? I mean, and I feel like it's deeply meaningful, and I moved across the country to the middle of a pandemic hotspot for this job, but it's really good to have good boundaries and to know that we have lots of parts of ourselves, and we don't, and yeah, I think you're exactly right. Like, folks are not interested in giving everything to the point of killing themselves, or to the point of neglecting their other relationships to their jobs, for just without questioning why they're doing that, And so yeah, I mean, it's something that I hope employers will reckon with in helpful and productive ways. I'm not super sure that will necessarily happen, but it would be really nice if it did.
Let's talk a little bit more about hard questions children ask. So what are some of the most common hard questions children ask, and what would be your answers?
We talk about a number of different kinds of questions in both volumes. We get questions about death and illness. We get questions about sex and sexuality and babies and reproduction, all that good stuff. Some of the really critical ones in this volume in particular were around difference. One of our writers grew up with quite a bit of anxiety in childhood, and she asked about why am I different and why am I worried all the time. One woman has a limb anomaly, and so her hand looks different than a lot of other people's hands. One woman writes about raising her son who has Down syndrome, and how she talks about that fact of his life to her daughter who does not have Down syndrome, and also to the rest of the world and to herself. So, there are some underlying things that we try to affirm in all of those, that, life is finite, we live and we die, and that there are lots of kinds of griefs and loss and fears. And it's okay to be sad, and it's okay to grieve. We talk a lot about how all bodies are good bodies. We talk a lot about how There's one really great essay, and the name of the woman who wrote it is slipping my mind, and I feel terrible about it. But she writes about intimacy and different kinds of intimacy, you know, because often, particularly in religious communities, you know, we sort of focus on physical sexual intimacy as if that is like the only kind of intimate relationship that we ever navigate. But she breaks it down into a number of different types. She talks about, you know, physical intimacy, like hugging, you know, the kind you would do with your child. You know, she talks about sexual intimacy, romantic intimacy, emotional intimacy, and talks about how different relationships have different levels of intimacy. And so you want to ask if a relationship is sort of uniformly, or it's a really good lens for thinking particularly about sexual intimacy. You know, like you don't want sexual intimacy if you don't also have emotional intimacy or physical intimacy. You know, I mean, if you can't hold hands, then you shouldn't be, you know. But also sort of asking what kinds of relationships are appropriate to be intimate. It's okay to be huggy with friends, and it's okay to be huggy with parents. And maybe you're in a community where you're huggy with lots of folks, but you wouldn't be huggy with a stranger, you know, and nobody should ask you to be huggy with somebody you don't know. So anyway, so giving kids a couple different lenses to think about things. It's, I think, affirming kids in what they see and in their experience of themselves and the world. And then if their lens isn't as accurate as you might like, try to offer them different perspectives. It's like a well-known phenomenon that teenagers, younger children too, but they're very, they're very egocentric. They literally think the world revolves around them, right? One of the great things about babies is they don't realize that like you are a separate person, like you, the parent, are separate from them. And that's a very exciting learning when they figure it out. So while something might be really sad for them or really terrible or really hard, it is not the only thing in the moment. It might pass, you know. You might be really afraid of being the new kid in the new school, but there are other kids who also are probably feeling that way. And after a couple days, you won't be the brand new kid anymore. So helping provide them with other lenses is important too.
Yeah, well, that's Reverend Bromleigh McCleneghan, minister at the United Church of Gainesville. Check out all of her books on Amazon. She's got a ton of them, including the new book, When Kids Ask Hard Questions, Volume 2, more faith-filled responses to tough topics. Bromleigh, if you could please share your website and also anything else you'd like to share with our listeners, anything you want to promote, please let us know.
Yeah, my website is in flux at the moment, but you can find me at Bromleigh M on Twitter and Bromleigh McCleneghan on Facebook. Karen, too, is on Facebook as well, Karen Ware Jackson. And you can also find the book at Chalice Press or on Amazon or anywhere that books are sold.
Bromleigh McCleneghan, thank you so much for joining us on the Work From Home Show. To all our listeners, check us out at workfromhomeshow.com. That's www.workfromhomeshow.com. If you have any questions, comments, email us, hello@workfromhomeshow.com. Follow us on social media. We're everywhere, Twitter, Facebook, LinkedIn. You can also leave us a review on the podcasting platform that you use to listen to us, iTunes, TuneIn, Stitcher, Spotify, Amazon Music. We're everywhere. And until next week, keep on working from home.